Welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter free at thecentersquare.com. Data centers are expected to consume extraordinary amounts of electricity in Louisiana, forcing utilities there to build new power plants, transmission lines, and other infrastructure. Now, Entergy Louisiana says that growth will not only simply create new costs, the utility argues its agreements with large data center consumers could ultimately save existing ratepayers about $2 billion over 20 years. But the Center Square Louisiana reporter Nolan McKendry reports consumer advocates argue those savings depend on optimistic assumptions that may not hold true over time. The argument is this: make data centers pay for the costs they create, then use the additional money they pay as some of Entergy's latest customers to help cover expenses everyone else already shares. Now, Logan Atkinson Burke, executive director of the Alliance for Affordable Energy, said Entergy's projections rely on what she described as very rosy numbers and limited analysis of what would happen if construction costs rise or expected revenues from Meta fall short. Michigan voters will head to the polls next week to determine the outcome of primary races that could determine the balance of power in Congress in November. The Center Square's Andrew Rice reports elections analysts are projecting that several seats in Michigan are toss-ups, which means either party has a decent chance of winning in the congressional district. Here's a look at some of those candidates and also what's going on at the gubernatorial race, with the final push being made to voters in this last week before next week's election. On the Democrat side, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's preparing to face off against Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson. For Republicans, U.S. Representative John James, who is holding a firm lead in polling at the beginning of the year, faces off with former State Attorney General Mike Cox and businessman Perry Johnson. Again, that election's coming up Tuesday, August 4th. Two bills at the California State House that seek to further regulate public safety concerns regarding inmates convicted of sex crimes still advancing through the legislature. The Center Square California reporter Madeline Shannon reports Assembly Bill 2727 aims to increase the age to 65 for elderly parole after an inmate has served 25 years of their sentence. It applies to individuals convicted of certain specific sex crimes. Now, that bill is next scheduled to be heard in the Senate Appropriations Committee after the legislature returns from its summer break in August. Now, the other bill, Senate Bill 1446, that aims to make the Board of Parole hearings voting decisions public. Now, that bill also allows for someone convicted of sexually violent crimes to be referred to the board for a sexually violent predator hearing. Both bills are just two in a slew of legislation introduced in California this year that still has yet to make it out all the way. And Democrats' New York Governor Kathy Hochul telling county sheriffs throughout New York that they need to end agreements with ICE to honor civil detainer requests for suspected illegal aliens in response to the state's newly minted restrictions. The Center Square contributor Chris Wade reports that in a letter to a dozen sheriffs across New York, Hochul ordered them to terminate their so-called 287G agreements with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement that allow local cops to deputize by ICE for immigration enforcement to cooperate with ICE. Now, Hochul said the federal civil immigration pacts violate newly signed state laws. The governor demanded that the sheriffs submit documentation verifying that they've terminated the arrangements by August 25th. In June, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against New York State challenging the constitutionality of that new law, which lawyers for the DOJ said would make ICE agents and other federal authorities subject to criminal penalties for wearing masks to protect their identity. And that's just some of what America's talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. You can join us back here Tuesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country. Only with the States, powered by the Center Square.